It's quite ironic. The most creative people tend to be highly sensitive. They're able to distill pain and tragedy or joy and communicate it to an audience in a way they can't normally communicate. But I work with a wide range of people, creative people in all kinds of different realms, scientists, artists, musicians, to poets, to actors. We're chasing dopamine. This idea is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're really good at joining dots, and we get a lot of dopamine from that. So the more we join, the bigger it becomes. And then all of a sudden, our dopamine crashes.
Outside! Outside!
Hello and welcome to Our Art Podcast with me, Matt Dean. This week's guest is someone that I discovered whilst on TikTok. Jake McNeill runs Creative Hackers, a business offering coaching and personal branding for, I'm going to get this right, multi-potentialities. And I'm going to let Jake explain that shortly. But before I bring Jake in, I'd just quickly like to explain what it was about Jake's content that resonated with me. So for years, I would have described myself pretty much as my parents and my school teachers did. Matthew has potential, but could do better, a lot better. For years, the frustration that I had with myself was matched only by those closest to me who could see that I was wasting the abilities that I'd been given. I've always been creative, but never did I deliver enough creative output. I'd always been very capable, but hugely inconsistent and undermotivated. And I'd always had brilliant ideas, but was never able to turn any of them into reality. So when I strolled across, but when I scrolled across Jake's TikTok and he was saying things like, your deepest fear is living your entire life without fulfilling your creative potential. And you feel scattered, you feel chaotic. You're like 4 different people because you've multiple interests and passions that are often conflicting. And creative talent is not rare, but having the courage to share the creative talent is. Was I able to recognize myself? Just a bit. Jake, welcome to Our Art Podcast.
Thank you very much, Matt. Pleasure to be here.
It was really, really interesting to discover your TikTok account. It seems to be doing quite well. It obviously resonates with a lot of people. And I remember scrolling through it and going, whoa, the whole kind of cycle of being stuck and the internal struggle with creativity just really, really resonated with me. And it really helps it make a lot of sense. We'll get into all that, but do you want to just give us a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and what Creative Hackers is?
Sure, no problems. I started, I am a multipotentialite, so the people I help have got the same brain as I do, right? So I started off promoting raves in the north of Scotland, and that led me on to promoting DJs. That led me to London, and I managed some of the biggest DJs in the world at the time. I started off doing PR, then I became an agent, then I became a promoter, and then I became an artist manager. And then after doing that for about 15 years, we were traveling around the world. I was, doing the whole global touring thing, which was fantastic. But ultimately, I got burnt out by doing that. So I decided to manage bands, because bands finish at 10:30 at night, whereas DJs finish at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I thought that was a better thing to do. So I started managing pop bands in the music industry, and I managed a band called Scout for Girls, who I'm sure many people know of, who sold millions of albums. They're still selling arenas now. It's their 20th anniversary coming up next year when we got them a deal with Sony. So I did the whole music industry thing, and what I realized is that a lot of my clients were kind of stuck all the time. So I just thought we were just creative, quirky people. But of course, what I later discovered is that we're multipotentialite. A lot of us are neurodivergent. That's not to say that everybody is, but a lot of the people I worked with were neurodivergent, ADHD. And we really struggle to focus and fulfill our potential because we are multi-talented. We've got so many different ideas. We flip-flop from one idea to the next and so on. So I found I had to come up with all these kind of like strategies to help my artists basically start album projects or single projects and then finish them, because we obviously had to deliver to Warner's or Sony or Universal, whoever it might be. So I had to start building all these strategies to basically help artists deliver albums, singles, whatever it might be, the deals be, so that they could then, fulfill their contractual obligations with whatever record label they have, right? And it was the same with the tours and so on and so on. So basically I built up all these kind of strategies over 30 odd years. And I had no idea that this was something that happened out with the music industry. I just thought it was just, us quirky music industry types, right? And then, of course, when I left the music industry, I discovered that no, it's just not all creative people, but most creative people our brains are wired in a certain way, that we're multi-talented, we're multi-ideas, we've got multi-different layers of intelligence, which often conflict with each other and basically get people stuck. So I started to write about that on Substack. It took a while to get going, but for the first 18 months, there was about 200 people there. And then I started going viral on Reddit and so on, and I got that up to about 11,000. I started TikTok, as you say, 160 odd thousand there, and I've just started Instagram, so it's about 8,000 in the last 50 days or something like that. So I mean, it's a huge problem. It's under researched problem, and it's just something that I happen to naturally come across while doing my job as an artist manager in the music industry, and it's kind of gone from there.
Wow. Because, I mean, managing bands I've been in bands and internal, not successful bands, just, hobby bands and fun bands. And even they're hard enough to manage. And you've got all the different egos, you've got all the different creative differences, as they're often called. You've got substances, you've got all kinds of things that you need to deal with. So I guess that in itself comes with a whole load of interpersonal skills that you've had to develop, and understanding people in a really, really broad sense. But what was it that kind of like flipped the switch to make you realize that it was a specific type of personality? And what research did you do into that to help you understand it more?
Well, I didn't really understand it until after I left the music industry. So I left after 28 years, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, because I'd spent all my career in the music industry, right? So I was kind of like stuck, and I was searching, and basically I discovered the problem myself. So I spent 12, maybe 18 months coming up with business ideas, getting really excited about them, and then not following through with them, or just bouncing from one idea to the next, be feeling really scattered, feeling really chaotic. And it was the first time I'd ever really felt like that to any sort of great length. And I was really stuck. So it was basically my own problem. And then it was like, well, I have to I'm really good at research, and, I'm intelligent. So I was like, right, okay, I need to go and solve my own problem. So I started doing all these deep dives into it, and I came across this TED Talk, which was talking about multipotentiality, and then I discovered multipassionate, and then I discovered neurodivergence and how our brains are divergent thinking, whereas a neurotypical brain is convergent thinking. So for the listeners out there, the difference would be a neurotypical brain goes 5 + 5 = 10. There's only one possible answer. That's how a neurotypical brain works. But a neurodivergent brain will go, how many different numbers can we add together to make 10? So there's 11 different options. So that's why we're so creative, and that's why we have an idea, which creates another idea, which creates another idea, which creates another idea. And then once I started understanding that, and how I started doing research into famous people who had this kind of brain and how they fulfilled their potential. So for example, somebody like Dr. Seuss had a brain with this, and he couldn't finish any of his books, so he had to be given constraints. So for example, his publisher bet him that he couldn't write a hit children's book using only 50 separate words. So that became Green Eggs and Ham. So as a challenge with a constraint, that then allowed Dr. Seuss to be able to finish books. Cat in the Hat was the same. He was only allowed to use 286 words. So what I had discovered is that if you create frameworks to funnel our thinking, then we can actually be very, very successful. And of course it kind of dawned on me, well, that's what I was doing with my artists in the music industry. That's how they went on to sell millions of singles or albums and stuff like that, is that I actually created frameworks without realizing that's what I was doing. So basically it was just a lot of sort of joining dots over a 30-year period. And that's how I discovered it. And then that's how I solved my own problem. And then I help other people solve the same problem now.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how you do that then with Creative Hackers.
Well, it depends. It's very personal thing. It just depends on the people. But I often use a framework which is based on Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, and he had a thing called the wounded healer archetype, which is very much like you have a problem, you then solve the problem, and then you help the younger version of you solve the same problem. And the reason that works so well is that it kind of really focuses you, because you've already experienced that problem yourself. You know what the problem was. You know what the hopes, the fears, the aspirations, the insecurities, all the the difficulties of that problem was, you then create a solution and then you help other people. And you can see this in pretty much every creative business. So if you look at something like CD Baby, so Derek Sivers started CD Baby. The reason he started CD Baby was because he wanted to sell his CDs online, and that didn't exist. So he learned to code. He was already a musician. He was already had his own CDs. So he made a website. He put his CD up there to sell it online on a website. And it turns out millions of other musicians had the same problem. So by solving his own problem, he then helped other people do the same. Etsy was the same. It was the founder was a crafter, and he had nowhere to sell his crafts online. So he started a website called Etsy. He had a problem, he solved the problem, and then he helped other people solve the problem. So that's how a lot of these businesses start. It's in entrepreneurial terms, you would say it's scratch your own itch, but essentially it's problem solving. We're excellent problem solvers.
Yeah, I think one of the things that probably resonate with me and with listeners is that thing of almost like one idea leads to another idea, leads to another idea, leads to another, and like you say, you start, and you don't finish, and there's a huge amount of frustration that comes in, and it's almost like you can see this really, really far off big picture and all these steps to get there. And then you just get completely overwhelmed and you don't start the first one. And that was me in my life for a long, long time. I think there's lots of different reasons for why, but it's incredibly frustrating and debilitating and depressing when you can't surmount that. And it just goes in cycles. You might achieve something for a little while and then you drop off. And you're having conversations with people and you're trying to do work on yourself and they're telling you these things, but then you still can't get going. It's really, really, really hard. And I'm actually able now, sort of having been able to sort of step back and understand a bit more about myself, and I'm actually achieving things now, and I've started following through with things now, and I've gone over that. I'm sure there's a lot I can do to improve, and I'm sure if I was to work with you or study what you do, I could make significant further improvements. But what advice would you give to people who are in that situation where they say, look, I've got so much potential. I know I'm good at this. I know I'm good at that, but I just can't get out of this loop. What's the first step?
Well, I think the first step is understanding why we're in loops, okay? So our brain, basically, we get dopamine from coming up with ideas. So every time you come up with an idea, we get really excited. And when our brains, divergent thinking brains tend to lack dopamine. So we tend to be chasing dopamine all the time. And this is also why people get addicted to scrolling on social media, stuff like this, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a big problem for creative people, right? So we do a lot of dopamine chasing. So when we come up with an idea, we get very excited. That then leads to another idea, which leads to another idea. And we're just chasing dopamine, right? And we're getting higher and higher and higher. So the metaphor I use to describe this is, those cute little tiny little houses you see on the internet. You go, so that's our original idea. We go, okay, I want to design and build one of these cute tiny little houses. So we build that and we get very excited. And then because we're so excited, we build on another layer, another level, and then we build on another level, and then we build on the helicopter pad, and then we build on the gym. So before you know it, this tiny cute little house in our minds has become the Empire State Building. And that's just because of the dopamine. We're chasing dopamine. This idea is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're really good at joining dots, and we get a lot of dopamine from that. So the more we join, the bigger it becomes. And then all of a sudden, our dopamine crashes. And all of a sudden, we look up at this metaphorical Empire State Building in our minds. And we're overwhelmed. We don't know where to start. So we crash, and then we feel shame because we feel like we're fooling ourselves. And then, of course, we our dopamines crash for a period of time, and then a week later or 2 weeks later, whatever point, we'll have another idea and we'll go through the same process all over again. So first of all, we have to understand what that is, okay? And once we understand what that is, then we can understand that what we have to do to stop that. So once I come up with an idea, I'm not permitted to go beyond that, right? So I design and build the tiny little house. Once I've built the tiny little house, then I allow myself to then build the next level and the next level and so on, eventually up to this Empire State Building. But it takes a lot of discipline to do that. And I'm not perfect. I still fall for the traps, the dopamine traps. But that's basically what it is. It's we're chasing dopamine.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. from my own personal experience, absolutely chasing dopamine here, there, and everywhere that I could get it. For a long time, what would frustrate me is that I would, whether I was in work and things like that, and working for other people, I'd be able to see solutions in things, and often I'd get when I'd be talking to somebody and I'd be talking about a problem or a business, often whatever it was, I'd really get into a real flow state of going through these things and then start getting really sort of excited and really passionate and really, and it's quite exhausting for me and quite exhausting for the person. You know, I'd be like really like, and I still do it where I'm like laying it on, because as I'm talking and as I'm going through this conversation and I'm having all these realizations and learning as I'm talking, I get really, really sort of wound up and excited, and it can be quite full on. But then often in a situation where like I'm sort of maybe these aren't things that are necessarily down to me or things that I can be responsible for, I feel like I'd go through that whole process and then it wouldn't go anywhere, and it'd really frustrate me. But I can, now that you've explained that, I can actually understand how that was making me feel, and that dopamine of that. This is brilliant. This is really, really sort of making me. It's it's flicking my switches. I'm going through this process of problem solving and going through this journey, and it's making me feel really good. And then there is a crash at the end of it when there's no outcome, and it can happen like just from having a conversation, just from being. Sure. With someone like where I'd love to I'd always think I'm really good at solving other people's problems, but I can't sort out any of my own shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's very common. I say that we can't read the label when we're stuck in the jar. And because I'm exactly the same, by the way, I can solve everyone else's problems. When a client comes to me in a 90-minute session, I can spot all their patterns, for exactly where they're growing, their limiting beliefs. I can do everything like that in a 90-minute session because I've done hundreds of them. And but I can't do it myself. So it's just it's the way it is, right? But yeah, I mean, it's a very common problem. But equally, it's been able to understand that our brains, that one of my clients describes us as pattern recognition sluts. We see patterns in everything, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why we're such good problem solvers. So when somebody else comes to us, we can be objective and say, oh, this is your problem here. You've got A, you've got C, you're missing B. Just plug in B and you're good to go. But we can't do that for ourselves because obviously, we can't be objective because we have emotional baggage, we have fears, we have all the different other barriers to go through. Whereas when we're helping someone else, we don't have that emotional baggage, and therefore it's really easy for us to spot people's patterns. But the reason we're such good entrepreneurs and creative people and stuff and problem solvers is simply because of our pattern recognition skills. We can see disparate subjects and how they can bridge together. And this is true of like Steve Jobs, or he always talked about joining the dots, or if you look at most creative genius, in fact, I would probably argue, although I can't prove that, but my hypothesis is that all creative geniuses have brains like ours, but they're able to harness and funnel them, basically. Yeah, and I think as well, it's probably a kind of where on your life journey you figure that stuff out, isn't it? I mean, like if you're able to manage that and get into that pretty early, when you're say in your early 20s or something like that, and maybe you're around the right types of people, if you're at a top university or something like that, and you've got great people around you, or you're just fortunate. Maybe if you grew up in where I grew up, in a working class part of Oldham, and it was a pretty crappy school, and it takes a long time. It took me a long time to join those dots for me, and what kind of brain I have and what kind of environments I best function in. So is circumstance a really, really important factor in figuring this stuff out? Does it, could people come to these realizations? Does it happen randomly to different people at different points? And is there ways that we can help people get to those realizations if maybe we know somebody like that, or we feel we're like that ourselves? Yeah, I think now there's just so much more information out there. So even when I left the music industry about 7 years ago, there wasn't this information out there at that point. So it's been very much a discovery. In my personal circumstances, I just happened to get into a job that was suited for a generalist, because an artist manager, you're overseeing teams of people who are doing radio, production, touring, agents, public relations, TV pluggers, radio pluggers, etc. You're overseeing a whole bunch of people, so that requires someone that's a generalist. And our brains are suited for generalist roles as opposed to specialist roles, where we get bored very quickly. So for me, I just happened to fall into a business that naturally suited my brain, and it was only when I left that business after a long period of time that I realized I had so many problems with it. So I think everyone's personal circumstances is different. I just guess I got lucky. But if someone's like an early 20s or late teens now, there's so much information they can read about this now and basically learn to harness their brains in very specific ways. It doesn't make it perfect, but it makes it powerful. So
yeah. I mean, because you hear it all the time. Oh, everybody's got ADHD now. Everybody's neurodivergent now. Is there anything within our world and lifestyles and stuff like that kind of encourages that? You mentioned about phones and scrolling and things like that, or is it just now that we're much more aware and we've always been we've always had a balance of, like you say, neurotypical, neurodivergent people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an ADHD expert. I would say I understand the creative mind really well, and that tends to be neurodivergent. But I mean, my personal hypothesis is that it's a combination of two things. It's both nurture and nature, in that we now live in an environment where people are monetizing our dopamine, right? And as we lack dopamine, I mean, I've got ADHD, so as I lack dopamine, I'm constantly chasing it. So, which is why doom scrolling can be problematic, and just so many different things now, right? But equally, I just think that there's more awareness of it now. I mean, I know in my family, because obviously it's a genetic thing. It's been proven that it doesn't just like arrive. It's come genetically, right? And I can see in my family, the older generations who would never have thought of this. I can say, oh yeah, you've got that, you've got this, and you've got that, which is quite amusing. But yeah, so I think it's been about for a long time. But I think now that there's just more of a language for it, coupled and compounded with the fact that we now live in a technological environment where they basically rinse our dopamine for profit.
I've said for a long time that, if we really wanted to help young people, we'd do a lot more with people's psychology in schools. We'd understand our brains a lot more. We'd put people in, we'd help them deal with stress and trauma from an early age. We'd match people up with activities and vocations that suited them, because it really is just about trying to find what you're suited for. We've tried to put square pegs in round holes for far too long, don't we? And that was I got to a point in my life where I was like, enough of this. I can't do things. I'm trying to do things because I think it's the right thing to do, and it's the wrong thing to do for me, and it's making me miserable. And until I've managed to start identifying the round holes and putting, my round pieces in them, things started to change. But we don't necessarily encourage everybody to do that, do we? In life, and it makes people unhappy. It makes people frustrated. What would your wish for young people be, and how would you sort of like roll out a plan if you had all the power in the world to try and help young people find, especially those with creative output, creative skill sets?
Yeah, I think you have to kind of follow. It sounds like lame advice, but it sounds like Steve Jobs said it, but so did Albert Einstein, so did Marie Curie. Is that you have to follow your curiosity, right? Because that's just a natural thing. For us, we want to be authentic, and you can't fake curiosity, right? You're either curious about something or you're not. So I'm very much intuition led, and the reason we get so stuck as creative people is that intuitively we want to follow creative things. But of course, it's been conditioned into us by society that, well, you have to go to, get good grades, go to university, get a boring job, do the 9 to 5. And obviously with AI on the horizon, AI in our environment now, that a lot of these things are going to change. But nonetheless, as I was a kid, that's what I was told to do. So we get stuck between what we feel we should do and what we feel we want to do, right? And we get stuck in that. But my daughter's she's going to be 12 in a couple of weeks' time, and we're very much encouraging her to explore what excites her, what that might be. And she's a very creative person, right? She happens to be very good academically, but she prefers creative work. So that's up to her really to find her own path. But ultimately, there's this whole starving artist myth, which may have been true decades ago, but I don't believe that's true now. I think that any entrepreneur uses creativity, scientists use creativity, anything at all is about problem solving is basically creativity. And if you can solve problems for people, problems that they're willing to pay for, then you will, I encourage creativity to the max. And I always think that creative people who are solving a specific problem for people will always be fine. So follow your curiosity, solve problems, help the younger version of yourself with a problem you've already solved. That's what I would do.
And this is obviously in the context of an art podcast, and it's not just art. Art is a very loose term.
Sure.
I'm based in my studios here in a cotton mill in Oldham, where we've got lots and lots of different creative people here. We've got creative businesses, photographers, videographers, printers, sculptors, all kinds of different creative businesses. And turning that creativity into a business is a problem in itself. But
sure.
creativity is such a broad term, and it's not just I'm an artist, I'm a creative, as in I have a particular skill. It's more of a mindset, isn't it? And that's and a way of how you approach everything in life. Yeah. If people often say they're not creative when really they are, and they don't really identify it within themselves. And I find that quite frustrating when people don't understand that they have it in them as well. Like, it's not, I mean, like you've said that you've identified that there are different types of brains, but there's an element of it within us all.
Sure.
And I think did you see that study from when NASA apparently did a study on kids?
Yeah, I saw that.
And he said they were all genius. They all displayed genius level learning or ability at a certain age, and then they followed them through life, and most of them lost it, because of the way that, like you said, the system that we move in, that we move through, discourages it, unfortunately. But one of the things I'm really interested in, and one of the things that I want to do here at 1853 Studios, where I'm based, is bring together the business community and the creative community or the artistic community to create a third space, and that's going to be the name of the event. Because it's for that purpose of bringing different skill sets, different minds, different personalities together to try and solve problems for businesses and to try and solve problems for artists and creative people, and saying, look, these things need each other, these two different spheres, the business world, and going into the business. You're a businessman, I'm a businessman. That whole world can be a bit dull, a bit dry, a bit kind of corporate and business here. And then the creative side can be a bit wishy-washy and a bit arty, farty, and not, kind of almost like reliant on things like handouts and grants and stuff like that. I think the two things come together, particularly in a town like Oldham, which kind of needs that kind of that spark, and that's where there's real potential. I think, like you were saying, in terms of entrepreneurship and different ways of thinking and transferring those skills across to each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I agree. We live a creative life. The creative philosophy is that we create everything. We're creating this conversation. We create our whole existence. We create our whole reality. And the thing with a lot of business people is that they're very good at the administrative side of things, but they're not good at the creative side of things. Every market is saturated, and administrators need creative people to work in tandem in order to basically get seen and heard and get noticed in saturated markets. And it's creative people that do that, right? They take something that seems mundane and they make it interesting, and that's basically what I think creative do. And I think that's where the gaps are in the market. So I would agree. Yeah.
What do you think it is about your or what feedback have you got from people about? I mean, I've given you some today in this conversation, but that you've 160,000 followers on TikTok. It's a big number. What is it about your content you think that really grabs people's attention, and how much of that is really mindful and conscious about what you do, and how much of it be kind of like, oh, this seems to be working quite well, I'll do a bit more of it?
No, all my content is kind of I create content in an unusual way that pretty much the opposite of what everyone else would tell you to do. I don't work out what the audience want. I don't go, because I just get caught up in second guessing. I'd say, right, okay, what kind of content does the audience want today? Do they want something on perfectionism? Do they want something on the fear of being seen? Do they want something on being scattered or being stuck? I have no idea, right? And if I try and do that, then I get stuck, right? And I learned that. That's a David Bowie thing. Rick Rubin says it in the book, The Creative Act, but David Bowie said it before him, that he was a selfish performer because he couldn't possibly second guess what the audience wants, right? And I'm quite sure the Beatles, nobody went up to the Beatles and said, hey, could you write a song about a yellow submarine? I'm quite sure they came up with all this kind of stuff themselves, right? So the point is for creative people that you have to do what feels true to you. So basically, all my videos, all my articles are me. I have a problem. And whatever my problem is on a daily basis, right, I then create a video to solve that problem and I put it out onto the internet. And then the people that also need that video at that particular time connect with it. And if enough people do that, it goes viral. So basically, I quite selfishly solve my own problems on a daily basis and put it out into the internet, and it finds the right people, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I read out before about creative talent is not rare, but having the courage to share the creative talent is. Is that something that you were in a position to do quite confidently, or did it take a little bit of were you shy, or how did that come about?
No, I mean, I had no social media until I was 49. I didn't start creating until I was 49. So I was if you've ever, the Artist's Way, most creative people know about the book The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron. And in there, she refers to shadow artists, which are people that are creative people, but they hide behind other creative people. So that's why I was an artist manager. Obviously, I was pushing people onto the stage because I was too scared to go on the stage myself. I had no idea. I was completely oblivious to my creative talents because I used all my creativity to help other people fulfill their potential. And it was only when I left the music industry and then that no longer existed, I had to then focus on myself. So no, I had to overcome the fear of being seen. I was terrified to start TikTok. I was terrified to start even Substack. I first started learning, I'm dyslexic as well, so I had to teach myself how to write because obviously school didn't understand any of these things. So I wrote for a good 6 months, maybe longer, on Reddit under pseudonyms. Building up my confidence, learning how to write. So no, it was a big problem for me. But the biggest problem is for creative people is we have a fear of not being seen. In other words, we want to share our work, we want to fulfill our creative potential, but equally we have a fear of being seen. So we have a fear of we have a fear of wanting to fulfill our creative potential, but fearing we're not good enough to fulfill that potential. And we get stuck in this liminal space in between it. And that's true of Robbie Williams. That's true of Taylor Swift. That's true of any, whatever the most famous creative people in the world get stuck in this chasm, because I haven't worked with them specifically, but I've worked with a lot of famous people who are stuck in this kind of like liminal space between the fear of not being seen, i.e. not fulfilling the potential, and the fear of being seen. So it's quite ironic is that the most creative people tend to be highly sensitive. So this is what makes them so creative. They're able to distill pain and tragedy or joy and distill it in a way and communicate it to an audience in a way they can't normally communicate. That's because they're highly sensitive. The flip side of that is that they experience a lot of fear of failure, perfectionism, fear of being seen, because of their high sensitivity. So it's a double-edged sword. Like everything, it's a paradox. So a lot of my work is not that the people don't know what they want to do. It's that they need to overcome the fear and to be able to do it.
Yeah, because you mentioned ego quite a bit in your work, in this content that I've seen, and that thing about making that assumption of what other people are going to think about us, and that stopping us, rather than just saying, sure. Because this is something I've gotten over in the last 5-6 years of, this is me, so I'll put myself out there, take it or leave it, like it, don't like me, that's fine. There'll be people who resonate, people who don't. But I've stopped caring what other people think about me. But for years, I had this way I wanted to be seen, and that stopped me from being myself and being seen. And it really is. I totally empathize. Someone who's been, wanted to sing, I still do sing and stand up in front of people, and you kind of build this picture of yourself that you want to be Yeah, I get like you said about David Bowie building up these different personas so that he could kind of live up to those different personas and leave himself over there, kind of thing. And it's just really, really fascinating. And what you've done really well is you're a really effective communicator. So this thing that you were struggling with, but you talk really well. You explain things really well, and it's very, very easy to understand. And you have that mixture of you use quite visual illustrations on your content while you're explaining it, and you're obviously very aware of the different how some different people take in information and all that kind of stuff, and I think it's fantastic what you're doing. I think it's really, really good, and the fact that you're able to share it. Obviously, you with Creative Hackers, you take people on as clients, you can explain a little bit about that, but you also, even just in those little short bursts of information, it's really, really helpful, I think, and really useful to people out there. So I really would encourage anyone who's been watching today, listening today, to go and check out Jake's content, because it might just unlock something in your brain and make you realize, that's me, that's why, and it might just help you go a bit further. So just before we wrap up, just give us a bit of info about what you actually do with people as a job and your personal coaching.
It just depends on the clients tend to fall into two different brackets. So some of them are really stuck; they don't know what to do. So when that happens, they tend to have lots of interest or lots of ideas. And with my pattern recognition skills, I often stack them up. So very common neurotypical advice would be to say, hey, niche down. And we really struggle with that, because if you've got 5 different ideas or multiple different talents, to pick one idea or pick one talent, that's why we bounce from one to another. So I help them what I call niche up. So I stack maybe some ideas or some skills together to solve a problem. And that way that they're not having to just niche down and focus on one of their talents. They're using 4 or 5 different talents. So an example of that would be, again, let's say Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss, he wrote the books, he did the poetry, he did the illustrations, he did the creative directorship. He did 4 jobs as one by stacking up his different talents to become the most successful children's author of all time, right? That would normally take 4 different people. So that's one thing I do. And then the other thing I do is basically they know exactly what they want to do, but they're overcome by fear, imposter syndrome, caring what other people think, whatever it might be. So basically, we have to work on those 2 things. So yeah, that's the 2 things I do. But basically, I work with people in a strategic kind of way, as I would when I took on an artist in the music industry. We would plan everything out and the strategy, step by steps, how to achieve what they wanted to achieve. But yeah, taking into consideration their mind, really.
And how long is a piece of string? Is there a typical period of time that you work with people for? Or?
I do like a 90-minute session as an original kind of strategy session, and for some people that's enough. Other people I've worked with for 2 years, right? It really depends. But I work with a wide range of people. It's like some are PhD scientists, very creative people in all kinds of different realms, from scientists to artists to musicians to poets to actors to entrepreneurs, all kinds of different things. And essentially, I'm a problem solver. They come and they say, "Oh, I'm stuck here," and for me, as I say, I can't see how I'm stuck, but I can see how other people are stuck. And it's very simple for me to say, "Oh, you're stuck because of X, Y, Z. There's a limiting belief here," and then we can kind of play with that and say, "Do you believe this is true?" And I kind of like unravel this limiting belief in them. For many people, it's 90 minutes is enough, but for a lot of people, it's longer term. It just depends on the size of the goal and how stuck they are, really.
And so is this it now? Have you found the thing? This job, this business? Do you have any ambitions to take it somewhere else, or is this? Have you found your thing?
Yeah, I think I very much found my thing, but equally, I still come up with ideas all the time, and I still so. For example, we're going to start doing events again soon, because I promoted events in the music industry, for 28 years, right? And then I got burnt out, and obviously COVID happened, so everything shut down, and I haven't done anything in 7 years. So now I'm like, I want to start putting on events again, right? Yeah. So we're going to do like sing-along events for mums, because, my partner, the mums never have an opportunity to go out and let their hair down. So we're going to start promoting events, where they have like sing-alongs and they can go and get drunk and just, take off their mask and have a good time and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's just something because I realized my partner doesn't get out, and mums are the hardest working people on the planet, right? So they deserve a night out. So I'll always go and do different creative projects all the time, but this is a very much a core thing, and I've done it for over 35 years, right? So I'm pretty good at it. and I can work with all really interesting creative people. And I love to speak with creative people because I'm always fascinated by their perspective. I love the perspective. That's what makes a creative person interesting, is not necessarily what they achieve, but it's their worldview on how they achieve it, right? So, I could read 5 different books on the same topic, but if it's 5 different creative people, each one's got a different perspective, and I find that fascinating. So I think I'll always do this, right? But at the same time, always do different things because, hey, I'm chasing dopamine, and just like everybody else, right?
And if there's a need to be met, i.e., what you've just said about your partner, and you can do that, then you'll do that, won't you?
Yeah, well, I just see problems like we all do. I see problems and oh, okay, I could turn that into a business. But I think it can be addictive. And, the problem is when you see everything as a business, right, which is very common, and turn every single thing. But this here, it's like, I was a promoter for 28 years, right? I know how to promote parties, and this is a problem. And it's like, okay, cool, I'm going to go and put it on. So for me, I do many creative experiments. So we will put on an event, and we'll do it as an experiment. And if it's something I enjoy that lights me up creatively, then I will do more. And if it's something it doesn't, I'll say, okay, cool, and I just move on. So I don't get caught up in the whole success or failure of things. I just see it as an experiment. So the experiment succeeds or the experiment fails. And then I just move on. And that's just something, again, it's something I work with clients about, and that's a kind of a creative ego separation. So that's not me that fails, it's the project or the experiment. And that's a good way of being able to separate our egos creatively from projects. So I just do things like that, basically because I think it's fun.
Absolutely. And like you said, I think talking is one of the reasons why I love doing podcasts myself and also helping people produce them. I get to sit in rooms and listen to interesting people talk and get a different perspective. After every single conversation, I learn something about that person, but often that helps me learn something about myself and something I can take and apply to what I'm doing. So I can imagine that what you do and the conversations you have, the people that you meet, the people that you get to talk to, must be fascinating. And this conversation has been fascinating as well. Really, really appreciate your time. Turns out we don't live very far away from each other. Didn't know that before the conversation started.
Small world.
A small world indeed. But if people anywhere want to find you, where can they find you, please, Jake?
Just creativehackers.co is the website, or social media. It's all Jake Creative Hackers across all the social medias. So just there.
Yeah, and I'll put the links in the show notes. And I highly, highly recommend that you go and follow Jake on TikTok and get those little hits, those little dopamine hits while you're scrolling, but useful ones that you can apply to your life, your creativity, your art, your music, whatever it is, your business. Jake from Creative Hackers, thank you very much indeed for joining us on our art podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, Matt.